Hello everyone, welcome to High on History podcast. This is Nishant, and along with me, my friend Adnan is here, who is the
Hi.
co-host of this podcast. Okay, hi Adnan. As we all are aware, the COVID-19 pandemic is going on, and we all are stuck at home, getting bored, confused about life, what to do and what not to do. So Adnan and I came up with an idea of doing this podcast about the subject we really like, and that is history. A lot of people do not like history. They studied history in their schools, and they most of them studied for sake of getting marks. We love this subject because history enables us to develop better understanding of the world we live in. Understanding the historical events and trends, especially over the past few centuries, enable us to develop greater appreciation for the current events today. So, hi Adnan, any opening remarks from your side?
Yeah, so I would like to begin with discussing our first topic. We were wondering where to start when we talk about history, and history being so vast, we were thinking of a timeline to begin with. And the first thing that come came to our mind was Indian history. And Indian history, when I started searching for it, the I found this very interesting movie. Uh, you may know the actor Ali Fazal has done this movie called Victoria and Abdul, and it is very fascinating to find out that a lower class Indian boy came from practically nowhere, a jail. He was a jailer in some kind of rural India, in part of Delhi and Agra, and how he influenced the queen to even to the extent of her giving him announcing that she will give the knighthood to this Indian boy. He never got, of course, because of the future King Bert of England, but it really influenced us to pick our topic as in the impact of India over in Western culture. So, Nishan, you want to start?
Yeah, sure. Even I didn't know about this movie. Like you told me yesterday, and I was shocked. Like something like that really happened. You also discussed about the papers being burned by the British Empire like that.
Yeah, I think British Empire was very frightening of Indian culture, or usually other cultures accept their own. Thought they were the superior force at that time, and it was true in many ways. But the thing is, they found that no other culture is capable of influencing other rather than their own, and it frightened them that Indian culture is so vast and so unique that it can inspire anyone, and it can, it's so beautiful. And the movie really portrays it, that how so many Indian references were in the Buckingham Palace, but then the queen never knew, because they never told the queen. They thought, yeah, this is a gift from the this and this colonies, or they had so many colonies.
Fascinating. I really look forward to see that movie. Okay, so talking about Asia and Europe relations, the Asia and Europe relations way long back in like third BC or even before that. So it began with the trades. Of course, the Romans used to trade with us, not only with India but also with Southeast Asian countries like Singapore, Malaysia, Jakarta, Java, and Sumatra were the names that time, and also with China, of course. So the first wave of exploration began with the Romans coming for the trade, and we are also aware of the invasion of King Alexander the Great. So we called him, but he came to India and then went back from here. So after Alexander, the Seleucus Nicator came. He was general of Alexander. He tried to invade India, but somehow failed. So I was reading about Roman trades in India, and I found a very fascinating trivia or a fun fact we can say. The Romans used to trade like gold, silk, and ocean pearls, and also spices, and many other things. So I came across this really interesting thing that the Romans and India were in trade of gold and pearls. Like India used to get gold and with exchange of pearls. And like the Romans were so addicted to these pearls, like they used to use it for their jewelry. I also read a really interesting fact that nowadays we can see that Jamaican people or Caribbean people, they uh, like वो अपने सर में ऐसे मोती डालते हैं ना, वैसे रोमन people used to do like that. They were decorating their heads with pearls, that they were so addicted. So
Yeah, even I read about how Indian sculptures were found in region where when the historic Greek places were, and the interesting part is that they never knew about those.
okay, so talking about Roman trades, as I mentioned earlier, the Romans were mad over pearls, and they used to import pearls in exchange with gold. And as a result of that, India was getting rich, and the Roman economy was really sinking. So what I read was there was a motion passed against King Nero in Rome to stop importing pearls, but Nero really liked pearls, and he was against it. So the Roman Senate was really angry at their king Nero that our economy is sinking and you are still importing pearls from India. Stop this. So
Hmm.
what Nero did was he struck down the motion by bribing pearls to the senators. So he distributed pearls to every senator and asked them to drop the motion. And they kept on importing pearls and their economy kept on sinking. So that's what I read and I found it really fascinating.
Moving on to the next century, the British Empire is now slowly getting its shape, and the Europeans are now trading with the Arabs. The Arabs did not have the facilities to grow those spices there and the coffee beans the Europeans needed, and they were the middleman in many ways, and they were trading with the Asians, and most of the spices are naturally grown in India. And British and the Europeans were uh, very phased about the idea that these spices that they love so much were found in India, and now they have to give them extra money to get this from the Arabs, and that led to one of the most viscous, or I would say most aggressive search for India, and the route to get what they want, and they that led to many deaths, and that led to a finding of a new world.
Yeah, you were talking about Arabs. The Arabs are really like what I read was the concept of zero was discovered in India, and the Europeans came to know about zero through Arabs. Like it went from India to Arab world, and then from Arab world to Europe.
Hmm.
So like zero, many mathematical concepts or many discoveries went to Europeans came to know about our discoveries and inventions through Arabs only. So that's really fascinating.
Yeah, and they usually didn't want to do the middleman thing, because Britishers were, I would say, the most greedy person there used to live, and did not want to give their extra money to this middleman Arab guys. So they went on the search and found out maybe not good or bad, but they found out Americans, and their empire kind of grew. But I would say this is not very uh, right for me to say this, but it can be put as this, like India was the reason why America was found in the first place.
Right. So also you mentioned about the British didn't want any middlemen. So not only British but also other European countries, when Vasco da Gama first came into India, he found that the Arab trades are already going on. So he thought he was the first one to come here and to start trades. But there was a kind of monopoly of Arabs and other South Indian nation, Southeast Asian nations. So he actually conspired the Indian kings against the Arab trade, and war was on and something like that. So yeah, you are
Hmm. And the Indian influence doesn't stop there. Even in the music industry, you could find that the Indian instruments that were known to us and were enhanced and transformed into our Indian classical music and all. There were there are so many varieties of that instruments that were not found in the Western culture. They had very restrictive type of uh, music system where they did not like to experiment, whereas the Indian instruments are so unique and so uh, I would say good that our Indians are so experimentative that we have um, mixed all kind of in the classical instruments, all kind of music instruments into one broad Indian culture. And here I have read that the masterpieces of Mozart and Strauss were beautifully adapted to Indian context. Even they were inspired by the idea of this Indian instruments and their ragas and so many uh, ways they communicate their emotion. A man, what a man is feeling through this raga. That the Mozart and Strauss found it uh, kind of inspired by it, and I found it very fascinating.
Yeah, absolutely. So, talking about European explorations in Asia after 1453, fall of Constantinople, Europeans started finding sea routes to Asia and China, later leading to imperialism in India and Asian and other Southeast Asian countries. So that leads to Vasco da Gama coming to India in 1498. And as I mentioned earlier, he saw that there is a Arab monopoly for the trade in India. So he broke that Arab monopoly and he founded the Portuguese East India Company. So many of people know only one is East India Company that was founded by the British, but actually there were many. So like there were East India Company for France, there were a Dutch East India Company, there were Portuguese East India Company. For that matter, there was Danish and also Swedish East India Company. The Swedish one is really
Mhm.
interesting that the that company was found in Sweden itself. So it had no factory in India, but there was a Sweden East India Company. So in early 1600s, the East India Company came to India, like in Surat, in Gujarat, and they asked for the permission of trade. That I think that time Jahangir was the Mughal emperor, so from him they asked for the permissions, and so he granted them permission to trade here in India, and so at the really slow rate, but they the basically based on East India Company was the foundation of what the British Raj was, and that's how it began.
Yeah, and the I think why the British Raj was so powerful in expanding their culture in India was because we, even though the Portuguese were the first to arrive at Indian ports, and notably in Goa, their main motivation was to convert everyone to the idea of Christianity, and that led to the downfall of Portuguese Empire because they were not as aggressive in expanding as British Empire was, because Britishers were only were only involved in economics, and their main aim when they arrived in India was to expand their East India Company and take control of the economy and cut the root at its source. And now, as we know, if Portuguese were that aggressive, we may have a different history, but Britishers were, and we are now
Yeah.
a different.
Portuguese and British relations, I read this really interesting fact or trivia, we can say, that in 1661, the Catherine was the princess of Portugal, and she got married to the British king. I think King Charles II. Along with her, the Portugal gifted a part of Mumbai, that is Bombay Bandargah, to
Yeah,
England, like in the form of dowry. दहेज में मतलब उन्होंने मुंबई का बंदर
Mumbai लिया था.
ब्रिटिश को दे दिया. So like how, and the people who signed this treaty did not even know where the Mumbai is, and they had never been to Mumbai. So that's what is more fascinating.
Yeah, yeah, and at that time was a cluster of seven islands, and it was not very habitant. And the main uh, port of trade was in Gujarat, and it was booming. So no one thought that Mumbai would become such an exporter of things, and Britishers would change their port to from Gujarat to Mumbai.
That's what. So British government, after receiving the dowry from Portuguese, they rented Mumbai Island to East India Company. I think not the entire Mumbai Island was given as a gift. Like the suburban of Mumbai, now what we know, it was still in Portuguese control, but most of few of Mumbai Islands were gifted to British government, and British government rented them to East India Company. So that's how the expansion of British in Mumbai began. Like we see many uh, imperialistic time buildings in Mumbai. So that's how it began.
Yeah, it's very interesting how our own land was settled by this monarchist empires where the citizen had no right over which country they belong to.
Yeah, exactly. So also I came across this thing that the India was ruled for most of the time by people. People often think that India was under British Raj, but it is not entirely true. Like India was ruled by East India Company for most of the time than the British Raj. So like East India Company was like any other company. It had like the board members and the shareholders. There were annual general meetings of East India Company, and people used to invest heavily in East India Company. Like there was this thing in British people that if you go to India, you come back like very rich, and the people used to invest in East India Company just to get more returns. Like they looted us and they took so shitload of money with them back.
That is very true. And we don't want to get into how British Raj and East India Company take control of all of this Indian subcontinent, but that kick-started this Indian influence on Western civilization more because now they know where these things are coming from, how they are getting rich, where the money is. And in back in history of time, we were not the first men to uh, influence the Western culture. It was always through Arabs and this other civilizations. But now India was the face of Western civilization because they now they now knew where their money is coming from.
So coming to East India Company, what I was talking about that the employees of India Company used to get this incentive, like to trade off their own private interest. For example, jewelry, which is a very small but very expensive thing, so you can hide easily. So many of these things made the British employees in India very rich. Like those who came to India got back, like they earned shitload of money, and then they went back to India, and then they built their very big mansions and all. So that was the thing. But also the trade-off was the mortality of employees of East India Company. Like it was like 30%. So many of the people who came to India from Britain used to die with malaria and other diseases like plague, वगैरह वो सब.
Hmm.
फिर, as I was saying, the British India Company made really big profits from here. They were here for a long time until the India Act made was in British Parliament. So in a way, we can say that the like we know in 18th century, the Industrial Revolution took place in Britain. So main reason of that industrial revolution could be the East India Company and what they uh, the looting is the right word. What they looted from here, the trade wasn't fair, obviously. So whatever the money they took from here, that money really boosted the industrial revolution and eventually completely changing the scene of Europe. And we all know what happened next.
Yeah, now we are moving on to after the independence. Now India is free of this British influence and British monarch, and now we are moving on to our own new chapter. Now Britishers were first enjoying themselves and enjoying from Indian products now have to pay extra money to get them because they were no longer in control of these things, and it really changed the demographic of how economics worked back then because now India was not going to be forced into selling any kind of stuff at a discounted rate, and now the Britishers were getting addicted to our very good stuff, and from Indian masalas to Indian music to Indian religion, and they were they really wanted to know, and India was ready to give it to them.
Yeah, right. So
And moving on to these masalas that India was once uh, forced to give to British Empire. I read that one of the main things when India became independent, the main policies that the new government forced West to import to have an import tax. Now the British Empire were very keen to not discontinue the trade with India, but at the same time they did not want to pay the extra taxes that India were enforcing them to pay, and that led to exchange, because now India had the power and the motive to get the money back from British, even though it is not equivalent to what the British took from India, but it was really for the first time India had the power to choose whether to trade with British or not.
right. So I saw this really interesting video of Shashi Tharoor. Have you seen that his debate speech
Yeah,
in
yeah, yeah.
Oxford University?
Oxford
He
University.
has completely nailed it. So I also saw one meme recently, like when you visit a British museum and you realize that you have paid to see the monuments the British stole from you. So
Yeah. Yeah, and also how if you want to see the real Indian culture, you can visit the British museums, because there is what there is where the main of our main monuments lies, and it really tells you. It is funny, but in a way very sad that how our own culture is so many miles away from us,
right. And people of this
and
country also not realizing that we had such a rich heritage. I mean, we still have like the great legacy, the great country that we have, but still we are now adapting to the Western cultures rather than our own. So that's
yeah, and I truly I am not I'm not orthodox in any way, but in some cases there were instances where our own culture was superior to their and to them, and this idea that Indian culture is backwards, or a culture is what people make of it, and if
right.
we stay true to our culture and make it.
So Adnan, you really talked about really great points that how great our culture is and how it has impact or how it has a great impact on Western culture. So we the main motive of creating this podcast is to introduce our people about our own culture, like how great it is and how we can take it forward and really get influenced by it. So I think we are almost done here. So thank you for joining in. Thank you, Adnan. We had really
Yeah,
great time.
uh,
We discussed
yeah,
really great things.
and
I really had
recording
fun.
and hear this. This is Adnan,
This is Nishan signing off.
and we